A single lamp on a dark street hides more than shadows. Welcome to Rust Evidence. I am your host, Silas Wren. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Your voices make this mystery alive. Let's begin. It had rained since the night before, the kind of steady drizzle that left the paving stones of Boulevard Richard Lenoir glistening under the faint lamps. Maigret stood at the window of his office, pipe in hand, watching the trickle of water run in dark threads down the glass. He was not waiting for anything in particular. There was no urgent case, no commissioner pressing for reports. It was only the middle of the week, and yet there was already that fatigue that seemed to come earlier with the years. He tamped the tobacco in his pipe with his thumb, lit it carefully, and let the heavy smoke drift through the room. Behind him, the office clock ticked with deliberate patience. It was near 7. He knew Madame Maigret would already be laying the table at home, perhaps even frowning at the thought that he might be late again. He thought of her small, practical movements, the sound of plates being set down, the steam of soup rising from the tureen. The image gave him a comfort he did not always admit to needing. The telephone on his desk rang once, shrill against the hum of rain outside. He turned slowly, almost reluctantly, and picked up the receiver. A sergeant from the local precinct in the 11th arrondissement spoke in a hesitant voice, as if aware he was disturbing the inspector at a quiet hour. "There's nothing pressing, Chief, but there is a small matter if you don't mind. A man found lying in the street, Rue des Orfèvres, not far from the river. It's peculiar only because no one saw him fall. The street is narrow, dark. Only one lamp at the corner works. He's not dead, but—" The sergeant trailed off. "It looks odd, that's all." Maigret listened, pipe stem pressed between his teeth, eyes returning to the wet window pane. A man lying in a street was not unusual. Men stumbled after drink, or quarreled, or simply lost their footing on the slick stones. And yet the sergeant's tone held that faint unease, the kind that never appeared in official reports, but clung to the voice like smoke. He said nothing for a moment, letting the silence fill the line. The sergeant coughed softly, as if waiting for permission to continue. "I'll come," Maigret said at last, his voice low and almost weary. He hung up without ceremony. Outside, the rain was fine but persistent, needling into the collar of his heavy overcoat as he stepped into the night. The lamps threw weak halos on the slick pavements, and the city seemed wrapped in damp wool, its sounds muted, its faces turned inward. He walked, pipe clamped between his teeth, toward the quay where the precinct car waited to take him the rest of the way. It was not yet a case, perhaps never would be, but something in the description— a man in a street lit only by a single lamp, no witnesses, no noise— stirred that part of him which always leaned toward silence and shadows. He had learned long ago that it was not the obvious crimes that troubled him most, but the quiet ones, the ones that seemed at first like nothing at all. And so, as the car pulled away and the tires hissed over wet cobblestones, Maigret leaned back and let the night carry him toward a street he did not know, where one lamp burned alone against the rain. The car left him at the corner, and for a moment he stood without moving, as if letting his eyes adjust to a darker kind of night. It was a quiet street, narrower than he'd imagined, lined with houses that had once been proud and were now content to be clean. At the far end, a single lamp burned with a faint tremor, humming the way some insects hum when they've lodged themselves where they don't belong. The rain had been reduced to a mist, the sort that settles on the face and collar without leaving drops you can wipe away. Somewhere a door closed softly. The street took the sound and swallowed it. They had not cordoned anything off. A pair of uniformed men stood off to the side, their shoulders bunched under capes, speaking in low voices and falling silent when he approached. The younger one, blue chin, polite eyes, stepped forward and gestured toward the lamplight, where, a little apart from the puddle that had formed beside the gutter, a dark shape could be made out. "He was here, Chief," the young man said, though Maigret had already begun to walk toward it. The shape had been a man recently. Now it was more an arrangement of wet cloth and slack weight. He lay on his side, one knee drawn up as if to keep company with his ribs. The face, when Maigret crouched, was unremarkable. Thinning hair, the small crater of a healed childhood illness near the temple, lips that would have been thin had they not been parted. There was no blood. The eyes were closed. Someone had put a folded handkerchief under the man's head, not tenderly, but with the quick, efficient distaste of a person who has done similar things before. The handkerchief had a stitched initial, perhaps an H, perhaps an N, the thread having faded. "He's breathing," the young policeman said. "We sent for the doctor." The ambulance, too. He came to once, tried to sit up, and then went out again. People say he wasn't here 5 minutes before we were called. No one saw him fall. How many people say that? Maigret asked, without looking up. The young man swallowed. 4 or 5. The concierge from number 14, the watchmaker across from her, a seamstress from the top floor, and the cafe man at the corner. We'll take their names again. Maigret touched the man's sleeve. The cloth was good but tired, a clerk's suit, brushed often and pressed by a woman who had practiced on children's shirts and her own skirts before daring to iron a man's jacket. On the lapel, a trace of scent. Nothing expensive, the kind barbers keep for men who nod when asked if they'd like a splash. The shoes were black, narrow. They caught light the way pebbles catch it under water. He pressed the leather with his thumb. The rain was a presence in the air, on the stones, on the policeman's cap, on his own hat brim, but the uppers were not yet slick. The welt at the seam where the sole met the leather retained the grey of dry dust. He straightened slowly, his knees reminding him that he was no longer the age when one stands without thinking. He looked at the lamp. Its yellow spread was mean, as if it resented the duty. The crescent scraped along the curb, leaving the doorway of number 12 in a pocket of shade. If the man had fallen from his own height, there would have been a different geometry to the body. He would have been turned more toward the gutter. The right shoulder would have taken more. Here the jacket was damp along the back, but the shirt at the collar looked almost free of rain, as though it had not been offered long to the sky. "Who moved him?" Maigret asked. The older uniformed man cleared his throat. "We didn't, Chief. We kept the people back. It was the concierge put the handkerchief, I think. She said she couldn't watch him lying like a sack with his head on the stone." "Bring her," Maigret said. They fetched the concierge from number 14. She came in her apron, sleeves rolled past forearms that were red and strong, her hair pinned back with the resignation of long habit. She kept her lower lip tight between her teeth when she looked at the man. The odor of lye and damp stairwell came with her. "You put the handkerchief," Maigret said without accusation. "I did, Monsieur Inspector." "It was there, in my pocket." "It's old," she added, as if oldness excused charity. "He groaned once, and no one did anything." People look, and then they go back into their holes. "You saw him fall?" "Me?" "Number." "I heard the man from the watch shop tap on his window. It's what he does after supper when he's finished. He taps the ash on the outer stone, always the same little tap." Her mouth lifted, almost a smile. "And then he called, 'Madame Vasseur,' the way people call for a broom. I came. There he was, just like you see. You touched nothing else?" "I moved my bucket, that's all." She nodded toward her doorway, where a zinc pail sat beneath the lip of the step. The water inside was grey, and a ring of clean showed along the stone where, at some earlier hour, she had scoured a stubborn patch of city from her threshold. Maigret walked toward the bucket. His pipe had gone out. He relit it, cupping his hand, and let the match burn down too far because he was watching the way the step reflected the lamp. It was clean. It wanted to be seen. Beyond that, toward the curb, the paving stones carried a film of grime rubbed by rainwater into a dull sheen. Between the bucket and the place where the man lay, the grit would have clung to a dragging shoe. to a knee pressing at the edge of a puddle, to anything that had crossed recently. There was none of that. Only the dark weight on the stones and the concierge's careful ring of cleanliness. He looked at the watchmaker then. The man was already ready for a conversation he did not want, hands folded on the sill of his door like a parishioner. His shop was as bright as the lamp was not, a little aquarium of brass and glass behind him. The wall clock ticked at the back, and another on the left disagreed with it by half a minute. The watchmaker was small, with a reputation for neatness written into his face, narrow nostrils, polished glasses, a moustache trimmed to match the width of his mouth. "You tapped your ash and looked out," Maigret said. "Yes," the watchmaker replied, with the defensiveness of a man who has nothing to defend. "I smoke only after I put everything away. 1 cigarette. My wife doesn't like it in the room because of the smell. So I stand here. You saw nothing until he was there." "Nothing. No one passes here at this hour. Those who have to, hurry. It's a quiet street. You can see it with a lamp like that." "And yet," Maigret said gently, "someone was here." The watchmaker blinked. "Yes. You know him?" "I don't think so." "You don't think so?" The man hesitated. He looked past Maigret at the figure, then back to the brass entrails of his trade. "He's like others. A face you've seen and not looked at. A civil servant, maybe. They are all a little the same." Maigret nodded. It was not untrue. From the cafe at the corner, a man in shirt sleeves watched and pretended not to. He wore his apron like a flag of truce and held it with fat fingers. When Maigret reached him, he wiped a dry glass with a dry cloth and lifted his eyebrows. "You heard nothing," Maigret said, almost as if conceding the point. "Ah, Inspector, with this rain the doors stay closed." The radio was on, very low. The match, the football. "No one in my place tonight, only a man who left 10 minutes before the fuss. It's not like the boulevard here. People don't come to drink when the street is asleep." "The man who left. What did he drink?" "A small beer." He seemed surprised to remember. He asked for a second and then changed his mind. He had a newspaper. He stood near the door as if he was waiting for his own nerves to settle, you know. Then he didn't finish the beer and put a coin down and left. "His hat?" "On his head." "Umbrella?" "No." "Coat?" "A raincoat. Light. The sort clerks wear when they don't want to look like they can afford one." "Where did he go?" The cafe man gestured vaguely down the street, not toward the lamp, but toward the end opposite, lost in the short distance night can create. "There. But maybe that's only because that is the way I remember." Heads turning. When people leave, they're already somewhere else. Maigret did not smile. He thanked the man and went back. The uniforms had done the thing uniforms are supposed to do. They had made a space around the body, spoken to those who came near, put the discomfort into words so that it could be borne. A doctor's car finally turned into the street and found its way to the lamp. The doctor was the sort who fetched his bag even when called to sign a form. He knelt, touched the wrist, looked into the man's eyes with a pen light that had seen better days. "Faint contusion here," he said, to no one in particular, feeling along the scalp. "No fracture that I can feel." He could have fallen. He could also have been pushed, but lightly. There's a smell of cologne, like from a barber. The pulse is slow. "Will he speak?" Maigret asked. "Perhaps in the hospital when he has decided whether to be offended by us." They lifted the man. The handkerchief fell. The initials showed again, darker now against the wet. The older policeman stooped and picked it up between 2 fingers. He looked to Maigret. Maigret nodded toward the concierge. She made a motion as if to thrust the cloth into her apron and then thought better of it, leaving it in the air between them. "No," he said. "Keep it for the moment. We may give it back to you." The ambulance doors closed with a softness that was almost propriety. As it pulled away, the street felt the change. It was itself again, but not quite. The people retreated by inches. Windows that had been dark developed a faint light, as though the building had taken a breath and exhaled on the glass. Somewhere above, a woman coughed. It had the quality of a practiced cough, meant for listening. Maigret stood under the lamp. He did not ask for statements. He did not yet want names in notebooks more than he wanted the street to speak. He drew on his pipe and let the smoke go out across the light. The mist caught it and made it part of the air. He looked at the paving stones again, at the absence on them. If the man had come down the street from the cafe, his shoes would have lifted the grit into small crescents. If he had run, there would be scuffs. If he had been carried, there would be two patterns, one following the other. There was only the rain's slow handwriting. A shutter opened above. A small, sharp face appeared between curtains that had been smoothed and smoothed again until they no longer remembered their creases. A child whispered, "Mama," and a woman whispered back, "Chut," the way women have whispered for so long that the word no longer belongs to them. He walked to number 12, to the doorway that the lamp avoided. In the angle between door and jamb, a scrap of paper had lodged and refused to be made pulp by the damp. He lifted it with a fingernail. It was part of a timetable, the sort posted at bus stops and stolen by those who like to know what time will be tomorrow. He folded it and put it in his pocket, not because of what it was, but because it had chosen to be there and not elsewhere. "Chief," the young policeman said behind him, as if reluctant to interrupt the conversation with the stones, "if you wish, we can ask them to go back inside." "They already have," Maigret said. He turned to the concierge. "Madame Vasseur, does anyone in your building come home at this hour regularly?" She considered. "The seamstress on the top floor works at the big shop on the boulevard. She comes late on Thursdays. The man in the back, second floor, M. Lenoir. He has a habit of walking after supper. He complains that his stomach isn't the same as when he was young. He spits in the gutter, so we all know when he returns. And the widow in the front on the first, she keeps her light on until she sleeps. She sleeps late because she has slept so much in her life already." "The seamstress's name?" "Clara. Clara, something with an S. She doesn't say. She pays on time. And Monsieur Lenoir?" "Lenoir," the concierge repeated, as though it explained itself. "Henri, I think. He used to work for the gas company. He knows about lamps." The word stayed with him for a second longer than the others. He let it. In the distance, you could hear the river dragging its grey through the night. The lamp hummed obligingly. He would go up, he decided, not to knock hard, but to stand where the hall smelled of cabbage and damp stockings, to wait while people found their faces. He would ask nothing complicated. He would say, "You heard nothing," and listen to the rustle that follows a lie too small to be named. He would ask the cafe man to show him the beer that had not been finished, to put his finger to the rim as if measuring the thirst of another man. He would watch how the watchmaker closed his door, if he turned the key with the care he gave to other things, or with the impatience of someone who wished the night would finish without him. Before he moved, he looked once more at the place where the man had been. The impression of him was already fading. Only the concierge's clean ring survived, a small declaration against the street's habit of forgetting. The bucket waited, resigned to being useful again in the morning. "Come," he said to the young policeman, and they stepped into the doorway of number 14 where the stair rose, narrow as if designed to make people take their time. The corridor smelled of cold stone and boiled coffee. Somewhere above, a radio murmured a dance tune to itself, not loud enough to be heard, only to be guessed. He put his hand on the banister and felt the smoothness where a generation of palms had filed it down to honesty. He climbed, not quickly. On the landing at the first floor, a door opened before his knuckles reached it. A woman with grey hair that had once been a colour stood with her hands at her sides, as if they had fallen there. She looked at him as if she knew him. Not his name, not his rank, but the shape of him in doorways. She did not ask what he wanted. She said, "It is not a bad street," and he heard in it the need to be forgiven. "We will see," Maigret said gently. He would go on, up to Clara and her late hours, and to Monsieur Lenoir with his walks and his knowledge of lamps, and perhaps the street would grow less shy. The rain was no longer mist now, only air that remembered it had been wet. He did not hurry it. There was time. The night had patience. So did he. The stairwell had that particular stillness of Parisian houses after 9 o'clock, when people have retreated to their rooms, but not yet to sleep. Each landing held a faint smell that belonged to it alone. Fried onions on the first, damp plaster on the second, the acrid tang of ironed cloth on the third. Maigret felt these scents as if they were part of the investigation, little fingerprints left by lives that rubbed against one another but rarely touched. He climbed slowly, letting the soles of his heavy shoes sound against the stone, so that those above might have time to decide whether to wait for him or to hide behind a silence. The woman on the first floor had already retreated into her room. Her door closed softly before he had even reached the second landing. He paused a moment, listening. A key turned with deliberation, the bolt set home. It was a gesture that spoke not of fear but of habit. One locked away what could be locked, then left the rest to the world. On the second floor, a door stood ajar. Maigret looked at the nameplate. Lenoir, Henri, and tapped lightly before pushing it wider. The smell here was of damp cloth and something metallic, perhaps old pipes or the lingering ghost of coal gas. The room beyond was not much more than a square with a bed pushed against the wall, a table covered with yesterday's newspaper, and 2 chairs that had been recaned badly by a man who did not like to waste. Henri Lenoir himself was there, his narrow shoulders hunched, a wool cardigan hanging loose. He had a face that had once been broad but was now falling inward, the bones showing their map beneath the skin. He was polishing his spectacles with a square of linen, though his eyes seemed sharper without them. "You take your walk, Monsieur Lenoir?" Maigret asked, without stepping fully inside. The man looked up. "Not tonight. My legs were heavy. The rain makes them worse. I opened the window instead. You saw nothing in the street?" "Only the lamp, Inspector. It buzzes when it's wet. Always has. I complained once when I worked for the company, but they said it was a matter of cost. Do you know the gas lamps? They never buzz. But no one wants them now." Maigret nodded, drawing on his pipe. He let the silence do its work. Lenoir shifted, his fingers worrying the cloth around the spectacles. "I heard a step, though," he added after a pause. "Just one. Not hurried. Not like someone passing. More like someone deciding. Then there was nothing. When I looked, the street was empty. You know the man they carried away?" Lenoir shook his head. "Faces change. People come, they go. I've lived here too long. They all look like strangers to me." Maigret's eyes lingered on the table. The newspaper had been folded in half, open to the page of crimes and accidents. One headline mentioned a quarrel in Belleville, another a theft near the Gare de Lyon. But it was the margins that held his attention, the faint smudge of a thumb that had pressed harder on a particular column, the kind of mark made when a man leans closer to decipher a name. He said nothing about it, only inclined his head and moved back into the stairwell. On the next landing, a girl's laughter was caught short by the creak of his foot on the step. The door at the top opened before he reached it. Clara, the seamstress, stood there, framed by the smell of pressed fabric and warm iron. She could not have been more than 22, with a thinness that was not fashion but necessity. Her hair was drawn back, her blouse open at the throat, showing the pale hollow where a necklace might have lain if she had owned one. "You are late returning," Maigret said gently. "I always am," she replied, not shy but resigned. "They keep us until the shop closes. Thursdays most of all. What happened? The concierge said there was a man in the street. There was. Do you know him?" She shook her head quickly. Too quickly. "I don't know men who lie in the street." Maigret watched her face. the way her eyes darted toward the stairwell below and then back, the faint tremor at the corner of her mouth. He did not press. He asked instead, "When you came in, was he already there?" "No, I saw nothing. Only the lamp and Madame Vasseur washing her stones. She scolds me for dripping when I come up. I had no reason to look. Did you hear voices?" I had my thoughts. I don't listen to voices that are not for me. Her words were rehearsed, like a piece of embroidery done too often. Maigret felt the small, brittle defense in them. He inclined his head again and stepped aside so she could close the door if she wished. She did not. She stood a moment longer, her eyes following him down the stairwell as if she were afraid to be left alone with what she had said. Back on the street, the mist had thickened again, softening the outlines of the houses. The lamp hissed above him, a solitary witness refusing to give more than its pale cone of light. The cafe man was wiping the same glass with the same cloth, though no customer had entered. The watchmaker had pulled down his shutter but left a sliver open at the bottom, enough to show that he was still inside, pretending to busy himself with gears while listening for footsteps outside. Maigret paused at the doorway of number 12, the house that had remained in shadow. He put his hand on the wood. It was damp but not cold. A faint vibration came through it, as if the house itself held its breath. He pushed gently, but it was locked. No nameplate, no bell, only a worn slot where letters might have once been delivered. He bent to peer at the keyhole. A faint trace of oil gleamed at its edge. Someone had used it recently. He lit his pipe again and stood there, smoking until the tobacco burned low. The street grew quieter still, as if resentful of being kept awake. Then he turned back toward the car that waited to take him to the Quai des Orfèvres. In the warmth of the vehicle, the younger policeman glanced at him, eager for a word, a conclusion, some direction. Maigret gave none. He stared through the wet glass at the reflection of the single lamp receding behind them, its glow bending and breaking in the rivulets of rain. It was not the man in the street that stayed with him now, nor the concierge's nervous charity, nor even Clara's quick denial. It was the silence of number 12, the door without a name, and the step that Lenoir had heard, one solitary step, deciding. At headquarters, the corridors smelled of damp overcoats and old files. He let himself into his office, loosened his scarf, and sat. He did not bother with notes. He had learned long ago that cases like these were not carried in ink, but in memory, in the slow accumulation of impressions. The pipe smoke drifted upward, curling in the dim light. He thought of the man's dry shoes, of the half-finished beer at the cafe, of the paper scrap in the doorway. Ordinary things, but they pressed against one another like stones in a wall, leaving gaps where water might seep through. He sat that way until the clock in the hall struck midnight. Only then did he put on his hat again and head home through streets that glistened like wet slate. At his own door, the light in the kitchen window told him Madame Maigret had waited. She would have put the soup back on the stove once, then again, and finally left it to cool. She would say nothing when he entered, only glance at him with that mixture of reproach and acceptance that was its own form of comfort. And as he turned the key in his own lock, he thought again of the street with only one lamp, and the man who had lain there as if placed by a hand that wished him to be seen, but only half seen in that poor yellow glow. The night had passed with a heaviness that lingered in the air the next morning, leaving the city washed but not refreshed. At breakfast, Madame Maigret moved quietly about the kitchen, setting a plate before him without a word of reproach. He ate without appetite, dunking bread into his coffee and letting it soften until it almost fell apart. The rhythm of domestic life was unchanged, yet he felt himself carrying the residue of that one lamp, that narrow street, as if its silence had followed him home and sat now at his table. When he reached the Quai des Orfèvres, the clerk handed him the hospital's early report. The man from the street was alive, though still not fully conscious. A mild concussion, bruising at the temple, and no obvious fractures. His pockets had been emptied at the hospital for safekeeping, a wallet with 60 francs, an identity card in the name of Francois Keller, born in Nancy, age 45, occupation clerk at the Ministry of Posts. There was also a tram ticket punched only once, a comb with 2 broken teeth, and a folded letter written in a woman's hand, unsigned, the words faintly blurred as if carried too long. Maigret read the letter twice. It was not a love letter exactly, but it spoke of waiting, of loneliness, of promises to meet at a certain hour and place. "You will understand, Francois, that I cannot go on like this forever." The rest trailed off into a plea that was neither demand nor resignation. He folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Longyon arrived then, rain still on his shoulders, his expression as perpetually gloomy as if the world existed only to inconvenience him. He dropped his hat on the radiator and said, "Another drunk, I suppose? Or some clerk who slipped in the wet?" "He didn't slip," Maigret said quietly. Longyon gave a sniff that might have been laughter. "You can always tell. I can tell his shoes were dry in a wet street. I can tell no one admits to having seen him arrive, and I can tell he was found in the only place where the lamp is too weak to show what it should." Longyon sighed, already defeated by the suggestion of complication. "So we go back there again?" Maigret nodded. He wanted the street by daylight, though he knew daylight would alter it. Places changed with the hour, just as people did. They went together, the car carrying them across the bridges and into the narrower quartiers. Morning made the houses seem smaller, less threatening, but the lamp remained the same, standing crooked, its glass filmed with a thin cloud of dust and damp. The paving stones were drying in pale patches where the sun touched them. The concierge was already on her knees, scrubbing her steps again, as if she wished to erase the night. She looked up only briefly when she saw them approach, then bent back to her work. "Do you know this man?" Maigret asked her, showing the identity card with Keller's photograph. She glanced at it, wiped her hands on her apron, and leaned closer. "Perhaps. I have seen him pass once or twice. But many men look alike when they hurry. He never spoke to me. Never came into the building? Not to my knowledge." She straightened, squinting against the watery sun. "Though sometimes I hear steps late. But here there are always steps. The watchmaker rises early, the seamstress returns late, Lenoir wanders in the rain. People come and go, you cannot watch them all." Longyon was scowling, scribbling notes with unnecessary pressure. Maigret let his pipe rest in his hand, unlit while he listened to the ordinary sounds of the street, the clatter of shutters being drawn up, the cry of a vendor with baskets of apples, the faint hum of a tram farther off. The street seemed so ordinary now, stripped of its secrecy, yet the ordinariness itself felt suspicious. He crossed to the café. The proprietor was wiping tables outside, his apron already damp at the edges. He looked less certain in daylight, as though the absence of shadows left him too exposed. "The man who had a beer last night," Maigret said. "Would this be him?" He showed the card. The café man leaned close, then stepped back quickly. "Yes, perhaps. He had that same hairline, thinning here. He read his paper as if it were something more serious than news, but I cannot be sure. It was raining." He sat near the door. "Did he speak?" "Only to order. And when I asked if he wanted another, he changed his mind. He left a coin. Exact, not generous. The kind who counts. And he went which way?" The man pointed again, vaguely toward the other end of the street. His finger trembled slightly, as though not from cold, but from the memory of uncertainty. They left him and turned to the watchmaker, who was standing in his doorway adjusting a clock already wound to perfection. He adjusted his glasses, peered at the card, and nodded without enthusiasm. "Yes, I have seen him. Passing, never stopping. A man who does not buy watches, only keeps his own running, There are many like him. Civil servants, clerks. They hurry in the morning, drag themselves at night. Why should we notice them? You said last night that you heard nothing until he was already lying there, Maigret reminded him. The watchmaker's lips pressed together. And I still say so. Perhaps he came quietly. Perhaps he came with someone who left more quietly still. I am not an heir for the whole street, Inspector. Yet you hear the concierge's bucket, and the seamstress's dripping shoes, and the lamp buzzing. The man's eyes flickered, caught for a moment. He looked away, polishing a brass case already gleaming. When one listens for small things, all one's life, one cannot help but hear. They went on to Lenoir, who had left his door open as if expecting them. He sat by his table with the spectacles now firmly on, reading the same newspaper he had left out the night before. He looked at the card, frowned, and said, "Yes, perhaps. He may have asked me once for directions. Or I confuse him with another. There are too many faces." "Yet you heard a step last night," Maigret said. Lenoir nodded. "One step, not two, as if someone had stopped to decide. That is all, not Keller's step. How should I know a man's step? I know my own, and I know the concierge's. Hers is heavy, mine is not. This one was neither. It was someone I did not know. They thanked him, left him to his paper." As they stepped into the sunlight again, Maigret stood still, pipe unlit in his mouth, eyes fixed on number 12, the nameless door. In daylight, it looked even more anonymous, just another entrance in a row of tired houses. Yet the oil at the keyhole still gleamed faintly. "Who lives there?" he asked the concierge when she came out again with her bucket. She shook her head. "No one I know. It has been shut a long time. Sometimes a man comes, turns the key, and goes in for an hour. He doesn't greet anyone. A tall man, coat collar up. He comes late when the street is dark. I thought it was rented for storage." "Storage? That's what people say." But no one knows. Maigret looked again at the door. The sun touched it but did not reveal anything more. He imagined Keller standing under the weak lamp, shoes still dry from having been somewhere sheltered, the letter in his pocket, a man who counted his coins and hesitated over another beer. A man waiting. For what? For whom? He and Lognon walked back toward the car. "What do you think?" Lognon muttered. "I think the street does not like to be watched," Maigret said. At headquarters again, he read Keller's file. A modest man. No disciplinary record. Steady work at the ministry. Lived alone in a furnished room near Gare de l'Est. Paid his rent on time, left early in the morning, returned late. No wife, no children. A few colleagues remembered him as polite but forgettable. And yet in his pocket had been the letter, unsigned, urgent in its loneliness. Someone had written to him, someone who had been waiting too long. And Keller had come to the street with one lamp, perhaps to meet her, perhaps to answer a summons. Maigret leaned back in his chair, pipe smoke curling around his head. He felt the weight of the silence again, heavier than the facts. A street, a lamp, a man lying as if placed. People who admitted to seeing nothing but confessed too much in their denials. And a locked door that opened for no one. The case was still nothing on paper, only fragments, but he knew already it would not leave him. It had the smell of rain on dry shoes, of half-finished sentences, of lives brushing against one another in the dark. And so he resolved to wait, to watch, to let the street itself betray what it tried to keep hidden. The morning's work brought the sort of answers that only made questions feel more solid. By 10, the hospital telephoned to say Keller had opened his eyes and asked for water. The doctor warned that he drifted in and out, that a long conversation would only produce fragments. Maigret went anyway. He preferred fragments gathered in person to sentences tidied by others. The ward was the quiet sort, with high windows that caught a pale sky and let it fall in rectangles on the sheets. Keller lay propped slightly, his face a shade grayer than the pillows. Without the rain and the lamplight around him, he looked even more ordinary, as though the city had turned him back into one of its countless clerks to be filed and forgotten. The doctor, sleeves pushed up, met him at the foot of the bed. "You may get 2 minutes, 3. He knows where he is. He knows his name. He's not eager to be helpful. But that may be the fatigue." Maigret moved a chair close. He did not sit yet. "Monsieur Keller," he said quietly. Keller's eyes opened the way a cupboard opens when its hinges are stiff. He looked at Maigret with that puzzled politeness clerks reserve for anyone who might want something stamped. "Yes. Do you remember last night?" A slow blink. His tongue touched the corner of his mouth, as if to find a missing word. "I remember the rain. You were found in Rue des Orfèvres. Do you know that street?" Another blink. "I know it now. Why were you there?" Keller looked past him, to the rectangle of light on the wall. He seemed to consider whether it was worth his breath to lie. "I was meeting someone." "A woman?" He hesitated, and that was enough. "I was meeting someone." "Did you go into the house at number 12? His eyes found Maigret again. There was a flicker, not recognition exactly, but the way a man's face changes when a word he hoped will not be said is spoken aloud. "No," he said too quickly. He swallowed. "I didn't have a key. But someone did." Keller breathed out through his nose. A small, defeated sound. She said, "The light," he murmured. "There would be only one. It would be safer. Safer than what?" No answer. His eyes slid shut. The line of his mouth softened back into the neutrality of sleep. The doctor appeared like a conjurer to move the pillow and say that that was enough for now. On the way out, Maigret looked at a metal chair by the door. A folded jacket lay over its back. "Keller's," the nurse said. He touched the lapel, the faint, cheap cologne. On the shoulder, hardly more than a rumor of powder, as if a face had rested there for a second and gone away quickly. He left the hospital with the city washed and already drying, a faint wind tugging yesterday's damp out of stone. Near noon he went home for a plate of stew. Madame Maigret had the table set as if it were an apology offered in advance for an interruption. She looked at him with that gentle severity she had perfected over the years. He told her the few facts he could carry into a kitchen without staining it. "A man with a letter," she said, pouring his beer. "Unsigned?" "Yes." "Then it is either a woman who wants to pretend it is not her, which is a kind of cowardice, or one who cannot sign because the letter is not allowed to exist." He glanced up. "She writes like the ones who wait," she went on, as though she were speaking of recipes. "Not like the ones who have decided. There is a difference. When a woman is finished, she writes short. When she is not finished, she explains. What do the ones who are not allowed to exist write like? They are careful about details. Where, when, and how to recognize each other. They put the instructions in the middle, as if instructions were feelings." He ate in silence for a moment. The stew was good and hot and tasted of thyme. He thought of the letter again. Where to stand, what time, what to look for. He'd been drawn to the sentence about time when he first read it, a clumsy clause set just so, as if copied from somewhere else. The scrap of timetable he had taken from the doorway felt heavier in his pocket now, as if agreeing. "And the lamp?" he asked. She shrugged, wiping her hands. "If there is only one, you cannot mistake it. A woman who does not wish to walk around in the rain looking for a man will think of a lamp." He finished his beer and felt that small click inside that comes when something aligns, not a solution, only a better question. By 2, he was in the small street behind the Gare de l'Est, where Keller rented his room. The landlady had the face of a watchful saint and the figure of a cupboard. She recognized the inspector's hat before the man under it. Her mouth prepared itself for prudence. "Monsieur Keller is at the hospital," Maigret said. She made a gesture that accepted fate's sting, and kept the sting to herself. He is a quiet one. Never trouble. Pays on time. Visitors? Never. Once in winter, a colleague brought him papers. Women? She shook her head. This is not an expensive house, Inspector. When women come, they are wives who knock on the wrong door. He let her take him up to the room. It was clean the way a room is clean when no one makes a mess. A narrow bed, a small wardrobe, a table with a chair. On the table, a razor lined up with a comb, their 2 broken teeth stalled next to one another, and a brush with a few pale hairs that were not Keller's. He picked one up between thumb and forefinger. Fine, longer, with a faint scent that did not belong to barbers. The landlady said nothing. It was not her business to have seen it. He opened the wardrobe. Shirts folded with the care of someone whose life was made of repetitions. On the inside of the door, a timetable for the number. 26 bus, creased with a circle penciled around the evening hour. Pinned beside it, a slip from a dry cleaner's with a name that was not Keller's, crossed out, and beneath it, in red pencil, F. Keller. The suit matched the one he had worn last night. Another, older, shone at the elbows. In the drawer of the table, under a handkerchief, an envelope like the one he had found in Keller's pocket, but empty. On its flap, the smallest notch of a fingernail dent, as if someone had closed it with hesitation. That was all. It was enough to confirm the picture and leave it maddeningly blank. He thanked the landlady, who followed him down with a step that clicked in sympathy with his own. In the doorway, she paused. There was once a telephone call, she said, as if deciding at the last moment that speech was sometimes a duty. 2 nights ago. He is not the kind to get calls. He took it in his room and spoke softly. When he came out, he had the look of a man who has been spoken to but not convinced. Did he go out after? He went to the barber's. She looked pleased to have remembered something that fit. He came back with his jaw smooth and foolish with cologne. He could see it now, a man of habits who, one evening, had disturbed his own routine in order to become slightly more than himself. He spent the late afternoon at the Ministry of Posts, where a superior with a face like a damp ledger recited Keller's virtues in a tone that made them sound like absences. Punctual, sober, correct, no friends among the staff, no enemies either, an occasional half-day taken without explanation. The man looked at Maigret as if daring him to find scandal in such moderation. By dusk he was back on Rue des Orfèvres. The lamp woke with its little grumble, throwing its thin circle onto the pavement. Daylight had washed the street. Evening gave it back its secrets. He did not skulk. He stood, a heavy man with a pipe, as if waiting for a friend with whom he had agreed to be bored. Longnon drifted somewhere around the corner with his bad mood and his better eyes. The concierge made 2 tours of her steps with a brush, then withdrew behind her lace as if behind eyelids. In the watchmaker's slit, a single band of light made a track across the dust. The cafe set out 2 tables and discovered that no one needed them. Around 7, the seamstress appeared, walking quickly, a parcel under her arm. Clara did not look at Maigret. She never looked at any man whose eyes asked questions, but as she passed the lamp, the light slid over her cheek and left behind a small brightness, a patch of face powder that had not quite matched her skin. She held the parcel close, the way girls hold to themselves what they have little of. She went in. A minute later, in the deeper dusk, a tall man came from the far end, coat collar up, hat pulled low. He did not belong to the street and wanted it to know that he did not intend to. He walked past number 12 without glancing at it, then stopped, turned not toward the door, but toward the lamp, and looked up at it as if counting its flaws. Then, with an economy that came from habit, he took a key from his pocket, inserted it, turned, and entered number 12. There was no drama in it. The door accepted him like a routine. Maigret felt, rather than saw, Longnon unglue himself from the shadow. "Storage," Maigret said aloud, as if testing the shape of the word. They did not rush. He gave the man inside time to be himself in there, to do the thing men do when they believe they are unobserved. After a while, the door opened again, and the tall man emerged with a small square package under his arm, wrapped in brown paper and string. He set the key carefully in the lock to turn it back, pulled the door to without a sound, and walked away the way he had come, his head inclined slightly to the rain that had begun again, too fine to be named. His shoes did not splash. They pressed the wet into the stones. Maigret stepped to the door and put his hand on the wood, warm still from the presence that had passed. He bent and smelled the air that escaped the crack. Not damp, as an empty place would be. Something else. Starch and the faint singe of fabric, the ghost of heated metal. In the silence he could hear a ticking, not a clock's. Something lighter, intermittent, as if a machine somewhere within cooled itself with patience. He did not try the handle yet. He looked across to the watchmaker's slit of light. It had narrowed, as eyes do when they have decided they have seen enough. On the upper landing window of number 14, a shadow crossed and halted, the posture of a man who listens with his chin near the glass. Lenoir. The lamp hummed gently, complicity without malice. Longnon came up, his notebook already half open. "We could force it," he said. He was a man who liked the simple verbs. "We could," Maigret agreed. He took his pipe from his pocket and did not light it. "Or we could wait." "For what?" "For the street to tell us who number 12 belongs to when it is obliged to know." They did not have to wait long. From the cafe's dimness came the proprietor, wiping his hands on his apron as if he had suddenly remembered he possessed them. He looked at the door, at the inspector, and then at the pavement, which is where men look when they mean to speak truth but wish to practice on stone first. "You asked yesterday about the man who left his beer," he said. "This one, who just now, he comes sometimes. He doesn't drink. He stands at the zinc and asks for change for a 5-franc piece." He pointed to the parcel under the man's arm, receding into the dusk. "Once I saw him with a bundle of shirt collars, the kind the girls bring to the irons to be pressed. He doesn't belong here, but he behaves as if he does." "Does he speak to anyone?" Maigret asked. "To no one. But the seamstress, Clara, she looks away when he passes, as if he were a thing she doesn't have the money to buy and doesn't wish to want. Number 12, scented of starch and heat, of a press perhaps, a place to iron in the hours when shops had closed, when girls with parcels came in late with collars and left early with coins. A place that wasn't a shop because it wanted not to be seen as one, a place for work and for the business that sometimes grows out of work when money and loneliness share a small room. He put his palm flat against the wood again, feeling the faint tremor, the little metal heart inside cooling. He could almost see Keller standing where he stood, not knocking, because the instruction had been to wait under the only lamp. He could hear a step deciding, then stopping, then going on. He could see, for 1 second, a face on a man's shoulder, leaving a whisper of powder, and then comforting itself with darkness. He took his hand away. The rain thickened by a degree, enough to show itself in the circle of light, slender lines stitching the street to the sky. He said nothing. He let the quiet hold a shape as one lets batter set before the heat takes it. Somewhere above, a window lifted and fell with a sigh. The city went on, indifferent and attentive all at once. "We'll come back in the morning," he said at last. When the iron remembers it was hot. He started toward the corner, where the car idled like a tame animal. "And we will ask Clara what people do with letters they cannot sign." The morning began with a thin fog that blurred the outlines of chimneys and softened the sound of footsteps on the quay. Maigret arrived at headquarters with the same heaviness he had carried home the night before, the impression of the warm door at number 12 still on his palm. He had slept only fitfully, the rain tapping at the shutters like a messenger unwilling to give its name. Madame Maigret had noticed, of course, though she said nothing. She had only laid his scarf across the back of the chair where he left his coat, as if to remind him of small certainties. By 9, he was back in the narrow street. The lamp had gone out, extinguished by daylight, but still leaning at its old angle. The concierge was rinsing her pail on the step, her breath visible in the cool air. She gave him the smallest nod of recognition, then returned to her task as if the stones beneath her brush deserved more of her attention than he did. Number 12 looked different by day. Its facade showed the streaks of old rain, and the shutter above hung slightly askew, a slat missing. But the door itself had been wiped clean, as if someone had passed a cloth over it in the night. He tried the handle gently. Locked, of course. He bent, listening. Nothing now. No ticking, no scent of iron, only the ordinary smell of damp wood. He turned to Clara's building. The door was still closed, but the lace curtain on the second floor stirred faintly. He climbed the stairs slowly, his hand brushing the smooth banister. The seamstress answered at once when he knocked, as though she had been standing just inside, waiting. She looked paler in the morning light, her hair pinned less carefully, her blouse buttoned wrong at the collar. "You are early," she said. "You are not at the shop." "I go later today. They have fewer orders." He stepped inside at her small gesture. The room smelled of fabric, of pressed seams, of cheap powder. The iron sat cooling on the table, its cord coiled like a snake. A small pile of collars lay beside it, half finished. She picked one up as if to prove her occupation. "You work at home?" "When there is too much for one pair of hands in the shop." "They give me extra. I sew in the evenings. I press at night. There is money in collars, Inspector, more than in blouses." He let the smoke curl from his pipe before asking, "And in letters?" She flinched, the fabric slipping from her fingers. "I don't know what you mean." He did not press. Not yet. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. From here, the lamp was visible, leaning, stubborn in its duty. "You returned late the night before last," he said. "Someone waited." "Someone whose shoes stayed dry." "I come home late every night." "Not with powder on your cheek." Her hand rose instinctively, brushed the skin, then fell. She sat heavily on the chair by the table, staring at the iron. "It didn't hurt him," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could call them back. "No one said you did." She folded her hands in her lap, the fingers twisting each other. "I wrote. Only once. He was kind to me once in the shop, nothing more. I told myself I could stop if I wished, but when the days are long, Inspector, sometimes you wish for something that does not belong to you." He was polite. He looked at me as if I were a person, not a pair of hands. I wrote that if he wanted to meet, he should come here, under the lamp. It was foolish. I thought he would not come. And yet he did. Her eyes filled, though she did not cry. I never meant for him to fall. I saw him go toward the door, but I never opened it. I thought if he stood there, perhaps he would understand I could not. I stayed here, listening. Then there was a sound, as if the air had been pushed from him. I wanted to run down, but my legs did not move. Someone else opened the door, Maigret said softly. She looked at him quickly, then away. "I don't know who, but I heard the key. It is not my key. Who else has one?" She pressed her lips together. He waited. Silence stretched, filling the little room like steam. At last she whispered, "The man with the parcels. He comes sometimes. I don't speak to him. He frightens me. He presses the collars for the shop at night when the machines are free. The mistress knows, but she says nothing. He earns more that way. What is his name?" I don't know. We call him Jules, but perhaps that is not true. He doesn't live here. He only works when it's dark. Maigret inclined his head. He did not ask more. He left her with her iron and her collars and the guilt she had stitched into her words. Back on the street he found Lognon waiting, his face sour with impatience. So nothing, Maigret said. Yet. They went together to number 12 again. This time Maigret knocked once, firmly. No answer. He produced the passkey the concierge had brought reluctantly, muttering that she wanted no trouble. The door gave way with a faint protest, and they stepped inside. The air was stale but warm, as if heat had been trapped. The ground floor was a single room, its walls lined with shelves of linen, neatly stacked. At the center, an iron press sat on its stand, the handle upright. A faint scorch marked the cloth draped over it. On a small table lay bundles of collars tied with string, each marked with initials. Beside them, a box of powders, rouge and cheap perfumes carelessly arranged. Lognon sniffed. Not only collars here. Maigret moved slowly, touching nothing. In the corner, a chair held a cushion dented by recent use. On its arm, a faint smudge of face powder. He bent, picked up a scrap of brown paper. It bore the stamp of a dry cleaner in Montmartre. Another life, folded into this one. Upstairs, 2 rooms. One empty, the wallpaper curling at the corners. The other with a bed too narrow for 2, yet showing the faint trace of 2. A man's shirt hung on a nail, still smelling faintly of starch. On the floor, a woman's scarf, pale blue, the hem frayed. He lifted it, held it to his face. Powder again, and the faintest trace of lavender. "This is not storage," Maigret said. "No," Lognon muttered. "It's a hole for secrets." They descended in silence. On the table by the press, Maigret saw another envelope, unopened, the handwriting the same as the letter in Keller's pocket. He slipped it carefully inside his coat. When they stepped back into the street, the lamp was still dead from daylight, yet Maigret felt its shadow as surely as if it had been burning. The concierge looked at him from her doorway, eyes narrow, as though trying to measure how much he now knew. Clara's curtain stirred again upstairs, then stilled. He lit his pipe, drawing on it until the smoke filled his lungs. The taste was bitter, and it suited him. A man with a dry cleaner's stamp, a girl with letters she should never have written, a clerk who left his beer unfinished, and a street with only one lamp that seemed to conspire in their silence. He did not yet know how the pieces lay together, but he felt the press of them, as if the collars stacked on that table had been arranged to conceal something far heavier beneath. He looked once more at the door of number 12, then turned toward the corner. The case would not break with questions. It would loosen, like damp plaster, if he let it. He would wait, as he always did, until the street itself grew tired of holding its tongue. By afternoon, the street had settled into its narrow routine again, as if the door of number 12 had never yielded and the iron had never warmed. It was the sort of day when Paris forgets itself. No wind to sharpen edges, no sun to make a virtue of shadows. Maigret walked it once from corner to corner, not as a policeman measuring distances, but as a man seeing how a place breathes when left alone. The lamp, silent now, a dumb face in daylight, leaned as always. The watchmaker had his shutter up just enough to let a strip of light escape. The cafe's zinc was polished into a mirror for an empty room. Madame Vasseur rinsed her bucket as if it were a sacrament. Above, on the second floor, the lace at Clara's window moved, and then remembered not to. He took the unopened envelope from his pocket and weighed it in his palm like a piece of fruit he wasn't sure he would buy. The same slanted hand as the letter in Keller's coat. No address. A fold not quite straight, as though made in a hurry. He did not open it. He put it back. "Where now?" Lognon asked, coming sidelong as if reluctant to be seen agreeing with the inspector's habits. "A little climb," Maigret said. "Montmartre." The dry cleaner's stamp on the scrap from number 12 belonged to a shop off the Rue des Trois Frères, a place with a bell that rang as if it had been taught bad manners, shrill and late. Inside, steam made a small weather of its own, and shirts hung on rails like pale, patient men waiting their turn. The proprietor was the sort whose eyes had learned to find stains before faces. He greeted them with a nod that saved effort. "You send bundles down to the 11th, Maigret said, showing the stamp. "To a private room?" "We collect them," the man corrected, with the dignity of someone who has few dignities to keep. "A fellow brings them late. He doesn't like to be seen in daylight with such chores. He says the ladies prefer discretion." "A tall man. Collar up," Maigret said. The cleaner's mouth twitched. "Every man is tall who wants to be left alone. He asks for change for a 5-franc piece," Maigret added. At that, the man laughed once without joy. "Ah, him. He breaks your coin into smaller ones and then tips in air. He brings collars, yes. Also, sometimes ladies' blouses, folded under old newspaper. He pays cash. I write no names when men bring no names. Does he come alone?" "Alone, or with a woman who looks as if she were trying to be no one in particular. A scarf like the sky before rain." He glanced at the inspector to see if this pleased him. "Lavender," he added. "That's her when she's not powder." "Do you hear his name?" Maigret asked. "If he has one, he keeps it for people who need to know it. To me, he is monsieur when he is polite and you when he is not." They left him with his steam and his shirts and stepped back into the cooler street. They didn't have a name. They had a scarf the color of mornings and a man who broke coins and made no mistakes with keys. It would do for now. On the way back, they stopped at the hospital. Keller was more awake, but wakefulness had made him cautious. He watched Maigret come in as one watches weather, resigned, a little impatient. "I have something for you," Maigret said, and put the unopened envelope on the table where Keller could see it without touching it. The man looked at it as if it might sting. "Your handwriting?" Maigret asked. Keller shook his head once, the smallest of motions. "Hers," he said, "but I never had that one." "You were to meet her under a lamp." "Yes. Why that lamp?" "Because there is only one." He closed his eyes and opened them again. "She said she didn't want to be seen walking up and down in the rain. She said the others would make me wait for nothing." "The others," Maigret repeated. Keller's mouth thinned. "There are always others," he said, and that was all he would say. He looked suddenly tired in a way that had nothing to do with his head. Back on Rue des Orfèvres, the air had taken on the weight of evening without its color. Numbers appeared on windows as lights came on one by one. Maigret paused at Lenoir's doorway. The old man was inside, spectacles on the end of his nose, the paper spread like a tray across his knees. "You complained once," Maigret said from the threshold, "about the lamp." "More than once," Lenoir replied, not looking up. "In my time, if a lamp buzzed, we fixed it. Now buzzing is a condition of the world. You know how to make a good lamp bad. I know how to make a bad lamp honest." He folded the paper. "Why?" "Because if a street has only one lamp worth the name," Maigret said, "people who don't wish to walk in circles choose it." Lenoir's mouth moved in something like agreement. "A week ago," he said, "the ones farther down went out." There was a man with a ladder the next morning. He looked at them and nodded and went away. He didn't come back. Perhaps he had a wife who needed him more than our darkness did. Or perhaps someone told him that in this street one lamp is enough. Who would say that? Someone who wants night to work a little longer here than elsewhere. He took off his glasses and polished them with method. "I heard voices 2 nights ago, a man and a woman. Quiet voices, the sort pressed close so they don't get away. The woman said, 'You promised it would be quick.' The man said, 'It is quick if he agrees.' After that I heard my own heart, which is not what you asked." "Did you know the woman's voice?" "I knew it had practiced saying difficult things. That is a kind of knowing outside. The lamp coughed itself awake, and the thin circle of its light remembered the spot where the concierge's ring of cleanliness began. Maigret went down and took his ordinary place in the street, the way a man takes his place in a queue when he has decided to be patient in public. Lognon wandered, gloomy, like weather that refuses to declare itself. The watchmaker's slit widened a finger, narrowed again. The cafe man wiped without looking. Clara came, later than on other evenings, with a small box under her arm this time, not collars, but a parcel wrapped in paper that had already lived another life. She moved as if listening to each step before taking it. At the door of number 14 she paused and looked toward number 12, and in the unkind light of the lamp her face showed not beauty, not youth, but something that makes a person suddenly particular. The courage of someone who has chosen a small defiance and is already sorry. A figure appeared at the far end. Not the tall man this time. Smaller, neater. The kind of neatness that pretends to be humility. Hat brim exactly parallel to the ground. Coat that had been brushed by hands that believed in the virtue of brushing. He walked with a precision that made his shoes part the wet, as if the street had agreed. He did not hesitate at number 12. He paused instead at the watchmaker's door, lifted a knuckle, tapped twice, and received no answer because answers had already been arranged elsewhere. Then he crossed, quick, to the nameless door, and stood with his back to it, looking up into the lamp's face as if asking the light to acknowledge him. His hand came out of his pocket with an envelope. He bent and slid it under the wood with the care of a man who feeds a shy animal. He straightened and turned and almost walked into Maigret. "Good evening," the inspector said pleasantly, as if he had asked for the time and been told it was the right hour for such things. The man's face didn't change, but his eyes did a small calculation. "Good evening." His voice was dry and exact. "You work nearby?" Maigret said. "I live nearby." "In which direction?" The man smiled thinly. "In the direction that is not your business." Maigret accepted the rebuff as if it were an old acquaintance. "You are not the one with the parcels," he said. "I am a man who posts letters when asked." "By whom?" "A lady." "And the lamp?" "The lamp?" The man lifted his eyes to its poor glow and managed to make it seem as if they had moved together by mistake. "It is a lamp." "It stands where it stands." The silence after that contained too much to be filled by words. The man tapped ash from a cigarette he had not lit, then put it away, because there was nowhere for it to go. He stepped sideways to pass. Lognon materialized, showed a badge with the air of someone showing a poorly chosen card. "We are not arresting postmen," Maigret said mildly. "Not tonight." The man went, neatness receding into the dark as if it were a kind of light of its own. Maigret stooped and fished up the envelope from the crack. The same hand again. This one had a letter inside. He felt it shift when he tipped the paper. On the flap, a thumbprint in powder, the whirl blurred. He didn't open it. "Are you going to stand here all week?" Lognon muttered. "We can bring them all in and let them invent less comfortable lies." "And give them light and chairs," Maigret said. "Perhaps later." They waited. Time in that street did what it always did. It pooled where the lamp fell and drained away elsewhere. The tall man came at last, not from the far end this time, but out of the cafe itself, as if he had stepped from the idea of shelter rather than the thing. He had a parcel again. He moved with the same economy, but something in him was less certain, perhaps only because someone had been seen sliding letters where letters did not wish to be seen. He looked at Maigret and did not look. He put the key in the door and let himself in. A faint breath of warm air touched the inspector's wrist. It carried no powder now, only the memory of it. "How long?" Lognon said under his breath. "As long as it takes for him to believe he's alone," Maigret said. They gave him that kindness. When the door opened again, the tall man had no parcel. He had left something and come out lighter. He pulled the door gently closed behind him, set the key by habit against the lock, and turned. And this time Maigret did not move aside. "You press well," the inspector said, as if they were men who could exchange professional compliments. The man's face stayed flat. "I work. At night. At night the irons are mine." "In that room," Maigret said, nodding toward the door. "No one writes their name on anything." "But you carry other people's names wrapped in brown paper. You bring collars and sometimes a blue scarf." The man's eyes at that went not to the inspector but to the lamp, as if to find in its weak light some confirmation that he was, after all, only a shadow among others. He did not answer. He tried to step past. Lognon moved without being asked. His sleeve brushed the man's coat, and a fine dust rose, visible for a second in the lamp's halo. Not lint so much as the ghost of starch. "Tell me about the woman," Maigret said, not unkindly. "The one who smells of lavender when she remembers and of powder when she wishes to forget." "Nothing. But not the kind of nothing one gets from men trained to give it. A nothing with corners, one that had to be maintained." The tall man breathed once, deeply, as if hoisting something invisible. "Do you know Keller?" Maigret asked. This time the eyes did move, a quick flicker that confessed more than a word. The tall man's mouth set. "I know every name that gets pressed into cloth," he said finally. "If it has a ticket, I've seen it. You saw his last night. I saw a suit that had been brushed in a hurry, and a man who did not finish his beer." The man looked at him in a way that said talk had reached its limit. He turned his head like someone showing the side that offends least. "I deliver parcels," he said. "I don't deliver people." He went past them with deliberate slowness, the slowness of a man who will not be accused of running. They let him go. The street accepted him and put him somewhere it keeps such men until they are needed again. Maigret stood with the envelope in his hand and the door at his back. The lamp hummed, busy with its work. Above, a window clicked. Lenoir had moved his chair closer to the pane. Across the way, the watchmaker's strip of light narrowed until it was only a line drawn with a cautious hand. He did not open the letter there. He slid it inside his coat, next to the other one he had not opened. They would say the same thing, he thought, and not the same. Instructions in the middle, apology at the end. The place, the hour, the reassurance that there would be only one lamp because two would be too many for people who wished to be almost invisible. "We come back tomorrow," he said to Lognon. "For what?" "For the same," Maigret said. "Until it is not the same." He touched the wood of number 12, felt only the cold of a door done with its day's work. "And we will see who has decided that one lamp is enough for a street that used to have two." The following day broke grey again, with a wind that carried last night's damp into the bones. Maigret stood at the window of his office, pipe heavy in his mouth, the envelopes lying unopened on his desk. Their weight was not in the paper, but in the silence that clung to them, the silence of words written to be hidden, not read aloud. He had resisted tearing them open because once opened, they would be facts, and facts have a way of killing the delicate half-truths people let slip when they still believe they are holding something back. He left the Quai des Orfèvres later than usual, carrying the envelopes in his coat, and returned to the street with only one lamp. By day it looked almost innocent, a narrow vein of ordinary life pulsing faintly. A delivery boy on a bicycle balancing bread, a woman shaking a rug from the upper floor, the concierge dragging her bucket with the stoicism of a ritual. Yet under it all he sensed the same unease, the awareness that something her did not fit. He let the street look at him before he moved farther in. The watchmaker was out sweeping a step, every flick of his broom precise, as if he were brushing dust from a watch's inner gears. He looked up and nodded without warmth. "You are here again, Inspector. You make us more nervous than thieves would. Nervous people reveal more than calm ones," Maigret said mildly. "You saw the man with the parcel last night." "I saw nothing." I heard the lamp hum, as always. He pressed the broom harder. When you look too long at a street, Inspector, it begins to look back. Maigret let him be. He crossed to the cafe. The proprietor was polishing glasses, his eyes dull with fatigue. "Business?" Maigret asked. "There is no business," the man said. "Only coins that don't buy enough beer. People drink elsewhere. They don't like being watched, not even by a lamp." The man's mouth twitched, a smile that didn't live long enough to be one. "Especially not by a lamp." Maigret stayed a while, smoking near the zinc, watching how the empty room seemed to recoil from its own reflection in the mirror behind the bar. When he left, the man followed him out to the threshold. "The tall one will not come tonight," he said softly. "When you are here, he doesn't work. He waits. He has patience, that one. Patience can be tiring," Maigret said, and walked on. At number 14, he climbed the familiar stairs. Clara opened before he knocked, her eyes shadowed as though she had not slept. On the table, the iron lay idle, the pile of collars untouched. She moved aside to let him in without a word. "You didn't go to the shop today?" "They sent for someone else. They said I looked tired." "You are tired." She sat, folding her hands in her lap like a girl awaiting judgment. "He came again last night, didn't he?" The tall one. "You know him well enough to ask," Maigret said. She shook her head quickly. "I don't know him. I only know he frightens me. When he looks at me, I feel like a seam he could pull loose." "You told me you wrote only once to Keller." That was not true. Her breath caught. She looked at the iron as if hoping it might speak for her. "I wrote twice. The first time he didn't come. I thought he had laughed at me. The second time, he came. And the third?" Maigret held up the unopened envelope. Her eyes widened, and her face drained of color. "That's mine?" "It is the same hand." "I didn't post it." "Then who did?" She hesitated, then whispered, "He must have taken it." The tall one. "Sometimes I leave things on the table before I fold them. Perhaps he saw, perhaps he thought." She broke off, covering her face with her hands. Maigret didn't comfort her. He let the silence grow heavy until she lowered her hands again. "Why Keller?" he asked. She looked away. "Because he looked at me as if I were not just another girl with needles in her fingers. Because he didn't laugh when I dropped things. Because he reminded me of someone I once thought might marry me. I wanted to believe I still existed." Maigret nodded once. He understood the need. He had seen it in other cases, quieter ones. Loneliness wore many disguises, but it always had the same voice when it broke through. He left her to her collars and went back down. Outside, the lamp stood mute in daylight, but he felt its pull nonetheless. He touched the wood of number 12. Still locked. Still withholding. He wondered how many secrets could be pressed into cloth before the cloth refused to hold them. That evening he returned again, not with Lognon this time, but alone. He stood under the lamp as the street emptied itself of daylight. People disappeared into their rooms. Shutters closed. Windows grew pale with lamplight behind curtains. The concierge put away her bucket. The watchmaker shut his shutter. The cafe man drew a line with his rag across the zinc and left it. The lamp hummed alive, its thin glow spreading over the stones like a circle drawn in chalk. Maigret lit his pipe and waited, the way a fisherman waits without caring if the water looks empty. He knew the street would not tolerate silence forever. It was the tall man who came first, his parcel tucked close, his shoulders hunched as if carrying nothing made him heavier. He stopped when he saw Maigret, but did not retreat. Instead, he crossed deliberately, set the parcel on the step of number 12 and said, "There." "For you? For me?" Maigret asked. "For whoever wants it." "You, him, her. It's all the same. I iron, I press, I carry. I don't ask names. Yet you know them." Maigret said quietly. The man looked at him with flat eyes. I know fabric. I know stains. People leave more of themselves in their collars than in their words. And Keller? He left nothing. That's why he was dangerous. A man who leaves nothing is harder to fold. What happened to him that night? The tall man shrugged, as if even that gesture were too heavy. He waited under the lamp. Someone wanted him to fall. I only heard it. A step, a breath, then silence. When I came out, he was already on the ground. I put nothing there. Don't make me the man who did. He picked up the parcel again, turned the key, and slipped inside. The door closed behind him with the softness of habit. Maigret exhaled smoke slowly. He didn't believe him entirely, but neither did he believe the opposite. The truth here was not sharp, but frayed, like cloth worn too thin. A shutter above creaked open. Lenoir leaned out, his silhouette stiff against the faint light of his room. "Inspector," he called down, voice trembling. "The lamp, did you notice? It burns weaker every night. Soon it will go out." Maigret looked up, pipe in hand. "Perhaps that's what someone wants." The old man shook his head. "Or perhaps it cannot bear what it has seen." The shutter closed again. The lamp hummed, and in its poor light, Maigret felt the case shift, not solved, not even close, but leaning toward something it could no longer hide. He stood there a long time until the mist thickened again, until his pipe had gone cold, until the street itself seemed to whisper that its patience, like his, was running out. The next morning, he rose earlier than usual, not because he had slept well, but because sleep had given up on him. The sky was colorless, a flat wash that made the roofs look as if they had been rubbed out of a sketch. Madame Maigret poured his coffee without comment, watching him over the rim of her glasses. He told her nothing. She had learned to read from the heaviness of his movements when the case was not yet willing to reveal itself. Before leaving, he pressed her hand briefly, more for himself than for her, and stepped into the chill air. At the Quai des Orfèvres, the unopened letters still lay on his desk. He considered them again, the neat folds, the powdery smudge on one flap. He could have opened them with a flick of his thumb, but once opened, they would become objects for evidence bags, cold and dead. For now, they breathed more usefully as secrets. He left them where they were and went out, pipe clamped between his teeth. On Rue des Orfèvres, the street had already begun its small labors. The concierge knelt scrubbing her step, humming to herself, in a tune too quiet to follow. The watchmaker adjusted a clock in his window with exaggerated care, as if to remind anyone watching that precision could be a shield. The café man arranged his tables outside, though the damp air promised no customers, and the lamp, though extinguished, leaned in its familiar pose, like an old conspirator dozing. Maigret paused at number 12. He pressed the door with his palm, locked, of course, yet a faint warmth seemed still in the wood, as if the press inside had worked through the night. He lit his pipe, let the smoke rise, and looked up at the windows. One shutter was ajar by the smallest crack. Perhaps accident, perhaps signal. He decided to begin not with the door, but with the neighbors. He entered the café, slid onto a stool. The proprietor looked up without surprise. "A coffee, Inspector?" "Yes, and your memory, if it's better today." The man set the cup down, wiped the zinc again. "I told you, the tall one doesn't come when you are here." "But when you're not?" He hesitated, glanced toward the door as if the lamp itself might be listening. "He brings things at odd hours, always paper-wrapped. Sometimes he leaves with nothing. Sometimes he leaves with something else. Once I saw a small handbag, women's. I didn't ask, because you didn't want the answer." The man gave a tight smile. "Because in this street, Inspector, answers are heavier than coins." "And coins are already heavy enough." Maigret sipped his coffee, bitter and thin. He did not press further. He knew the man had said as much as he dared. When he stepped back into the street, Clara was descending the stairs of number 14, a parcel under her arm. She looked startled to see him waiting. "Already at work?" he asked. "They gave me collars to finish at home. They said I could deliver them myself." He walked beside her without asking, pipe smoke trailing between them. "You said the tall man frightens you." She clutched the parcel tighter. "He does. And yet you let him see your letters." Her steps faltered. "I didn't let him. He takes what he wants. He thinks we girls have no right to keep things hidden. And Keller," she swallowed. "I wanted to see him. Only to see. To remind myself I was not invisible. But he looked so tired, Inspector. Tired in his bones. I thought if I spoke, he would not forgive me for disturbing him." They reached the corner where she was to deliver the parcel. She paused, her eyes bright with something unshed. "Do not make me say more. I wrote foolish words. That is all." He left her to her errand. He had learned that pressing too hard on fragile fabric made it tear. Better to let it hold its own weight until it yielded naturally. By late afternoon he was back at headquarters, staring at the unopened envelopes again. A clerk entered, hesitant. "A message from the hospital chief. Keller asks if he may see you. He says it is important." Maigret rose at once. The hospital ward smelled of antiseptic and damp linen. Keller was propped higher now, his face still pale but his eyes sharper. He looked at the inspector as if measuring what he could give away. "You still have her letters," Keller said softly. "Yes." "Do not read them aloud. They are not meant for daylight." "Then why give them to strangers?" "I didn't give them. They were taken. She trusted me, and I was careless." He closed his eyes briefly. "I was told to meet her under the lamp. Not by her, but by someone who used her words." "Who?" Keller's fingers twisted in the sheet. "The tall one. Jules, they call him. He told me it would be safer if I came at night under the lamp. He said she would be waiting, but she was not there. Only him. And then—" his face clouded. "I don't remember. A pain. The stones. He struck you?" "I don't know." "Perhaps. Or perhaps he only watched me fall. But I remember his voice saying, 'Now you will understand.'" Maigret left him with the weight of those words. Outside, on the steps of the hospital, he lit his pipe though the wind tried to steal the flame. The case was shaping itself, though not clearly. A girl who wrote too much, a clerk who wished too little, and a man who pressed more than cloth. A street with only one lamp, chosen because it gave just enough light to make lies possible. That evening he returned once more. The lamp flickered to life, its weak circle on the stones like an old stage. He stood within it, pipe smoke curling upward. One by one the shutters closed, the street retreating into itself. Only the door of number 12 remained mute and expectant. From the far end, the tall man came again, slower this time, without a parcel. He saw Maigret waiting and did not turn back. He approached, hands empty, and stopped within the lamp's glow. "You speak to Keller," he said flatly. "Yes." "Then you know he is nothing." "A clerk who dreamed of things that were not his, and you." "I keep order." When people write foolish letters, when they step beyond their station, someone must remind them where the seam ends. "I do that. You struck him." The man's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I pressed him back into his place." That is all. Maigret studied him in the weak light. His face was ordinary, but his eyes held that chill certainty of men who believe they enforce rather than destroy. He drew once more on his pipe, letting the silence stretch until it seemed the lamp itself was listening. "You'll come with me," he said at last. The man did not resist. He simply shrugged, as if the inevitable had finally arrived. As Longnon stepped from the shadow to take his arm, the watchmaker's shutter snapped shut, the concierge's curtain dropped, Clara's lace trembled upstairs. The street exhaled. Maigret looked once more at the lamp. It hummed, weary but still burning, casting just enough light to show the truth, and no more. They took him without fuss. At headquarters, the tall man sat where so many had sat, on the chair that creaked if you shifted too quickly, at the table whose gouges remembered other nights. He gave his name as Jules Varin, though he spoke it like a garment borrowed for an occasion. He kept his hat on his knees and his hands on his hat, long fingers flattening the felt to no purpose. Longyon stood with his notebook the way a man stands with an umbrella in a room where it does not rain. Maigret did not begin with questions. He filled the kettle, lit the small gas ring, and watched the blue flame take its time. He tamped his pipe, struck a match, and for a while the room contained only the smell of burning sulphur, the little wind of the kettle beginning to consider steam. Varin looked not at the inspector, but at a point beyond his shoulder, the trick men use when they wish to seem thoughtful without the inconvenience of thought. "Coffee?" Maigret asked. Varin made a motion of indifference that tried to be disdain. He accepted the cup all the same, both hands around it, not to warm his fingers, but to justify them. "You press at night in number 12, Maigret said at last, as if remarking the weather. "I work," Varin replied, "and you keep keys that are not yours." "I keep things that must be kept." He looked up briefly, his eyes flat. "People leave too much of themselves where it can be found." "And you find it?" "I am careful." Maigret nodded, as if impressed. He reached into his file and placed the two unopened envelopes on the table, side by side like twin reflections. Varin's gaze flicked to them and away, but the effort cost him. The hands tightened on the cup. "You slid one of these under the door last night," Maigret said. "Earlier this week you took another from a girl's table. You posted some, you kept others. You told a man when to stand under a lamp." Varin said nothing. A faint whistle from the kettle gave the silence a measure. Maigret poured himself a cup, not offering more. "Tell me about the lamps farther down the street," he said, as if changing the subject. "They failed a week ago." Varin allowed himself a small smile, meant to be superior. "I press collars, Inspector. I'm not an electrician." "You're not. But you know men who climb ladders for a few francs. You know that a dark street is useful when a girl is ashamed to be seen and a man is easily led. You know that one lamp will do most of the work if it stands where you have chosen." Varin looked at the envelopes again, then at the door, as if the corridor beyond could be persuaded to open. It did not. The building settled around them like a large animal arranging itself more comfortably. "You wanted order," Maigret went on, not accusing, not even harsh. "That's what you called it last night." Order is a tidy word for the habit of pushing people back into their corners. Girls who wish to write are careless. Clerks who wish to read are dangerous. You keep corners tidy. Varin's jaw tightened. "You think you know. You sit and smoke and you call loneliness a crime because it makes work for you." "I call what you did a kind of theft," Maigret said. "Not of money. Of words, of chances to be foolish in a way that harms no one. It harms." "It always harms." Varin snapped, the first heat in his voice. "Men like Keller, they come and they go and they forget to pay, or they promise and then turn their backs. And girls like that one, Clara. They send letters and then cry. And who is there after? Me. I am there. I wash the powder out of the cloth. I iron the wrinkles you people make." He leaned forward, the hat brim creasing under his fingers. "I keep the street as it is supposed to be." Maigret let the outburst sit between them until it lost some of its edges. "Tell me about the night under the lamp." Varin looked down. The coffee had cooled. He drank it anyway, as if to remind himself that he had a mouth. He was waiting. He looked like a man who had never done anything wrong, and that is worse. He kept looking at the door as if doors should open when he looked. I told him she would come. She would not. She has no head for such things. I told him to be sensible. He said nothing. He had barber's cologne on him. He thought that would make him belong. A curl of contempt darkened the last word. And then Varen's shoulders rose and fell. He wobbled. He is not a strong man. I put my hand on his sleeve and he pulled away as if I had burned him. He stepped wrong. I don't know if it was my hand or his foot or the stone. He fell. I did not push him. I swear then you put your keys away and went back to your iron. I am not a doctor. No. Maigret's voice did not change. But you are a man who closes doors. Varen's eyes met his for the first time. There was nothing there to like, but there was something to understand. The kind of certainty that needs the world to be smaller. Clara will say you took her letters, Maigret said. Keller will say you used them. They can say what they like. Varen sat back, the chair complaining. I collect what others drop. If they don't wish me to have it, they should hold on. The door opened then, not with drama, but with the cautious knock of a man who knows he's intruding. Lenoir stood there, hat in hand, though his hair stood anyway, a newspaper folded under his arm. He had come of his own accord. Maigret had not sent for him. You asked about the lamp, he said without preface. I have a piece of it. He stepped in, ignoring Varen as if he were furniture. From his pocket he produced a small bakelite fuse, the sort used in older fixtures. This is wrong for that lamp. It burns too hot and dies too soon. Someone changed it. Not a repairman. A man who wanted to sell darkness cheaply. Varen's mouth made a thin line. Lenoir placed the piece on the table the way a man places a card he knows will win nothing but has to be laid anyway. If the city wishes to know, I will tell them. I worked the lamps 30 years. It is a poor street, but poor streets deserve proper light. Thank you, Maigret said. He meant it more broadly, for the stubbornness of certain men who refuse to let small indignities pass for fate. Lenoir nodded and withdrew, leaving behind the fuse and a faint smell of attic dust. Maigret returned to the table and, with deliberate care, opened one of the envelopes. He did it as if he were handling a fragile thing in a museum. He did not read each word. He let his eye move, catching the shape of a sentence, the way the hand pressed harder midline when giving a time or a place. A woman's caution and hope folded together. In the middle, instructions, under the only lamp at 9:30. The words had the form of a plea disguised as a plan. He slid the letter across to Varen. You copied her phrasing. You used her trust to make your own arrangements. Varen glanced and looked away. If I had not, another would. Who? Varen laughed once, short. Men like you. Men who sit with files and decide what is allowed. Men like me rarely care whom a clerk meets under a lamp. Men like you care very much. He stood, suddenly tired of the chair, of the room, of the way night clung to morning in such cases. We'll hold you, he said to Varen, for tampering with public lighting, for interfering with correspondence, for what happened in the street we will see. Perhaps the doctor finds more than a fall, perhaps not, but you will sit a while in a light you didn't choose. Varen's shoulders sagged, and the certainty leaked out of him the way warmth leaks from a cup in a cold room. You make it all about me, he muttered, but it is the same everywhere. They all want to be something else. Perhaps, Maigret said. He did not argue the world. He left Varen with the drained cup and the envelopes now that they were no longer secrets but paper. In the corridor, he found himself walking more slowly than usual. Outside the office window, the river had taken on the color of pewter. He thought of Keller in his bed, of Clara with her iron, of Lenoir with his fuse, of the watchmaker hearing the hum, of the cafe man counting coins that refused to multiply. A street, a lamp, a narrow economy of lives. He needed air. He crossed the bridge and let the wind take the pipe smoke from his mouth. On the far side he entered a cafe that did not know him, ordered a beer, and did not drink it. He sat a while, hearing the scrape of chairs, the dull music of spoons on saucers. No one here was waiting under any lamp. It was almost a relief. He returned to the hospital before evening to tell Keller what there was to tell. The man listened as if listening to a weather report for a city he might never visit. When Maigret finished, he stared at the ceiling. "He is wrong about order," he said. "He thinks it is something you can push people into." "What is it then?" "Habit," Keller said, surprising him, "and kindness when it can be found. I'm a clerk, I accept that. But for one evening I wanted to be the sort of man a woman writes to. That is not a crime." He closed his eyes. "I will go back to my desk. But I will always see the lamp." On his way out he stopped before a mirror in the hallway and saw his own face as if it were someone else's. A heavy man with a coat that had known a lot of rain, a mouth made for a pipe stem, eyes that had learned to be steady when steadiness was all there was to offer. At home, Madame Maigret set a casserole on the table. He told her enough for her to nod and say, "They should fix the bulbs," as if that were the essence. Perhaps it was. She poured him wine and asked no more. The room smelled of laurel and onion, the safe smells that make individual tragedies smaller for a time. After dinner he went out once more, not because the case required it, but because he liked to see things settle. On the street with only one lamp, the evening had gathered itself. Lenoir's window glowed. The concierge's step was already clean. The watchmaker had drawn his shutter to the careful line that allows a man to see whether the world has kept its appointments. Clara's lace trembled when he stopped beneath it, and then stilled. The lamp hummed, tired. Its circle was mean, but enough. He stood in it, thinking of the letters now emptied of their whisper, of Varron sitting under a stronger light, of Keller smoothing his suit with a hand that would never feel elegant, of a girl who would hesitate before she wrote again and perhaps write anyway. He thought of the fuse on his desk, a small wrong piece that had made a larger wrongness easy. He did not stay long. The night was the street's, and the street had learned he would not take it away. He turned toward the quay and walked, the river carrying its heaviness beside him like an old companion. In the morning he would sign papers and speak to men in offices who preferred summaries. He would not tell them about the moment when Varron's hands betrayed him, flattening a hat that had not deserved such attention. He would not tell them about the sound a kettle makes when the room is silent. Those things were not for reports. At the corner, he looked back once more. A man crossed under the lamp without noticing it. A woman paused to adjust a strap. A cat unhurriedly selected the other side of the street. Life had returned to its delicate, stubborn procession. If there was a lesson, it was not one that could be written. He let the pipe go out in his mouth and did not relight it. There are nights when smoke belongs to the city rather than to a man, and this was one of them. The case did not end with drama. It closed the way some evenings do in Paris, the rain easing without apology, the sky giving up its weight little by little until the streets were left wet and quiet. Varron had been transferred to a cell where he could pace but not leave, and the magistrate would in time find the right phrases to turn interference with letters and tampering with public lamps into punishable offenses. Whether Keller chose to testify fully or not, there was enough. The law would make it slow, deliberate movement. Maigret's part was already finished. He visited the hospital one last time. Keller was sitting up, paler than before, but with the stubborn air of a man who had decided not to die simply because it had been suggested. He greeted Maigret without warmth, but without resentment. "So it is over?" Keller asked. "It is over enough," Maigret said. "And Clara?" "She will go on," Maigret replied. "She will press collars, and sometimes she will look at her window lace too long, and she will think of you. She will learn to be more cautious with paper. But she is still young." Keller nodded, and his eyes drifted to the window where a strip of grey light fell across his blanket. I wanted to believe I could be someone else, if only for an hour. Maigret put a hand on the man's shoulder, a weight that was less comfort than acknowledgement. "That is not a crime," he said, echoing Keller's own words. "But some men cannot bear to see it." Later, he returned to the narrow street. He did not go to number 12 or climb the stairs of number 14. He stood instead beneath the lamp, which hummed dutifully, its cone of light no brighter for all it had seen. The watchmaker's shutter was closed, the café empty but for the proprietor's slow polishing, Lenoir dozing with his newspaper on his knees, Clara's lace curtain moving faintly in a draught. All as it had been, all as it would remain. The concierge came out with her bucket, nodding to him as if he were just another neighbor taking the air. He watched her scrub at the step, circles of cleanliness fighting the grime, and he thought how that was all most lives amounted to. Small patches of brightness kept against the dark, fading each day and made again the next. When he turned to leave, the street gave nothing more. No revelations, no confessions, only its ordinary life closing back around its secrets. That was enough. He had what he needed, the truth, or enough of it to carry. On the walk home, his coat collar turned up against a fresh drizzle, he thought of the lamp again. It would keep burning until the city finally remembered to replace its parts, until some official clerk signed a paper Keller himself might stamp. By then, no one would recall the man who had lain beneath it, or the girl who wrote too much, or the tall man who pressed more than cloth. Only Maigret would remember, perhaps on some other rainy night, when another case left him waiting in silence. At home, Madame Maigret had left soup warming on the stove. She asked. Nothing as he entered, only placed a bowl before him and sat nearby, knitting. He ate slowly, savoring the ordinary warmth, the honest simplicity of a meal prepared without secrets. The pipe smoke drifted toward the ceiling. He said at last, almost to himself, "It is always the same. People want to be a little more than they are, or a little less, and sometimes someone else cannot let them." She looked at him with quiet patience, as she always did, and answered with the faintest smile, "Eat while it's hot." And so the case of the street with only one lamp slipped into the ledger of his memory, another story of ordinary people, their loneliness, their mistakes. Not evil, never evil, only human. The rain tapped softly against the glass. The lamp in some distant street hummed on, and Maigret sat in silence, knowing there would always be another night, another voice, another shadow to watch, the 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 shadow to